Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this Cybersecurity for Startups webinar. I'm Wendy Jarko. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for River SaaS Capital. You may be aware River SaaS is a private debt fund focused on early and growth stage SaaS companies that are looking for non-dilutive capital to scale. But you may not be aware that in addition to providing capital, we utilize our sister companies as a value add to our portfolio borrowers and potential borrowers. One such company, which is MRK Technologies, works with similar SaaS companies as River SaaS Capital and provides expert CISO security services and products, network, and storage solutions. So here today is Chris Clymer, who's the director and CISO, to talk with you about the importance of security preparedness and what you can do to mitigate your risk, as well as what to do if there is a breach. So without further delay, I will turn it over to Chris. Thank you again.
Fantastic. Thanks, Wendy. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I know all of you are very, very busy. And for a lot of you, this is probably lunchtime if you're in the Eastern time zone. So I appreciate you making time over lunch to chat with us a little bit, learn a little bit more about security. As you can see from the title, right, this is another one in our series that's really focused on startups. And we're going to talk today a little bit about what to do if you happen to get breached. We've all read about this stuff in the news. We all probably know somebody who has experienced a breach, had a customer, a vendor, a peer company. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today unpacking a little bit more what you can expect it to be like and what we think are really good actions to take when that does occur. Wendy covered a little bit there off the top. I'll add, so I'm with MRK. If anybody's not familiar with MRK Technologies, we're part of we call the True West family of companies. We've been in business for 30 years. We've got a footprint all across the globe, across the True West family, US, Canada, Europe. And you can kind of see on the screen there's a whole lot of us that make up different flavors. In MRK, we focus on kind of technology sales, security products, storage network, the CISO for hire practice, which I run, and our SOC as a service as well, which I'll talk a little more about. TRG, sister company, they're in the point of sale business, handheld scanners, point of sale lifecycle management, and the thing I think is really, really cool, because I'm a security guy, they actually are PCI certified for pin pads. So the thing that takes your credit card in a grocery store, they've actually got a secure facility with cameras all over it and 2 badge swipes to get in, and all this cool stuff that basically is the room where they can crack open in a secure facility a pin pad and inject the encryption keys that are used to encrypt all that sensitive credit card data, which is really cool. River Capital, River SaaS, Wendy mentioned a little bit. The River Capital side, they're involved in providing leasing and financing for some of the equipment sold by the other companies. And then the most exciting part of the family is Sibling Revelry right at the bottom there. That is the brewery that is owned and operated by the same ownership as the rest of the companies. So, you know, if you're ever near the MRK office, I'm always happy to take people on a tour of the brewery and, you know, share a little bit of the product. It's a really, really fun piece of the business. I mentioned the CISO practice, which is what I run. So it's a CISO for hire business, and that's the experience we're going to draw from as I'm speaking today. So this tells you a little bit more about that perspective. We work with a lot of startup companies. The role that we're in, everybody on the team, we've all been in technology and security for a couple of decades, been in senior roles in-house at a lot of companies, and we're really working as a part-time employee for our customers, where we are their CISO, but we're there on a part-time basis because they're not really in a position where they can afford to hire somebody full-time. And so the things I'm speaking to today, when I talk about what to do to prepare for and respond to a breach, these are the things I'm doing with my CISO hat on for these customers. Again, many of whom are startups who are lean and mean and have limited resources, but are being asked these big, tough security questions by their customers. So the things I'm talking about are things we absolutely are doing at startup companies that I work with. I mentioned the SOC, the MSSP practice. We've also got that side where these guys, they're doing 24/7 monitoring for a lot of our customers. They they're staffed up and looking through logs, analyzing data, basically trying to figure out if somebody's been breached. So I also have that I'm able to lean on, and I see a lot of how these incidents happen through the work that they do and the investigations those guys are doing. It's a really great capability we're lucky to have. And then me, you can see me on video here. I'm dressed real nice right today, but that's me on the weekend at Edgewater Park here in Cleveland. I mentioned I had the CISO practice. In that role, right, I'm wearing the hat for, everywhere from startups to, publicly traded companies. They're all over the map. You name the vertical, healthcare, technology, retail, manufacturing. We're involved in just about everything you could think of. Recovering banker. Actually, a lot of the team here, we all worked for the same Fortune 500 bank at one point. As you can see from the picture, amateur Ironman, just to give you maybe a little more fun image of me than what you see on the screen today. So with that out of the way, I'll dive in. What to do if we get breached. So I want to start off a little bit with how these things typically happen. And for a lot of you, this is probably not earth-shattering stuff. We've all heard of these things before, but I think it's kind of a good way to set the stage for the rest of what we're going to talk about. Common ways we see breaches happening. Far and away, these phishing attacks, right, where somebody clicks on a link, clicks on an attachment in an email, whether it's a pen test or a real incident, bad guys don't want to work any harder than they have to. It is very effective to send these things. They're not usually going to pound on your firewall, your MFA protected logins, all these more difficult things, right? Complicated hacks of your applications. These things happen. But frankly, breaches usually happen because of the easy stuff, right? The bad guys are going to send phishing emails. The other thing that I don't think I've actually got in the slide, but happens a lot, that's relevant probably for this audience, they just find your stuff that's out there and insecure, right? You've put data out in an S3 storage bucket and bad guys find it and it's sensitive and now they want to hold your ransom for it or sell it to the highest bidder. These are not things that are technically difficult, right? They're low-hanging fruit. If I'm a bad guy, I don't want to work any harder than I have to. In that vein, right, password guessing. In this day and age, if you have account logins that don't have multi-factor authentication on them, you are literally just waiting for somebody to get in. My old firm, we tracked stats on our pen tests for what we did this because this was the first thing we did in every pen test. And we reliably we were able to predict passwords 2% of the time. So take your employee base, calculate 2%. That's how many accounts I'm going to guess passwords for. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the password right now, summer 2021, exclamation point, capital S on the summer. That meets complexity schemes for most people, right? It's 8 characters, it's number, it's uppercase. Somebody probably has that password. I'm going to try that one time on every account. If that doesn't work, then maybe I'm going to try spring 2021. In Cleveland, I might try Browns win 2021. You get the idea. I'm not going to trip your account lockouts. These things are difficult to see if you're not doing, you're not running a sim and doing correlation and that sort of stuff. So it works really, really well. MFA stops these kind of attacks really well. So not to belabor it, just you should have MFA. If you don't, if you're hearing this and kind of, puckering up a little bit, go talk to your team about getting MFA in place because it's far and away the thing it's going to make an impact. Social engineering, right? The other thing we see over and over again is the more focused kind of breach, right? Employees get tricked into exchanging payment information. This is more focused, right? The bad guys figure out who your finance employees are, who your controller is, who your CFO is. Might all be the same in a small company. Might be outsourced for a small company, but they'll figure out who these people are, and they'll send them very targeted emails to try to get them to exchange payment information and then transfer those funds before people figure out what's going on. This still happens a lot because people are naturally trusting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what a breach is going to be like, what it's going to feel like, because hopefully most of you here haven't actually had to live through this. And I'll talk about the technical details, but before I talk about that, kind of big picture, just what's it going to be like? You're going to feel very, very out of control, right? Somebody else has got into your stuff. Somebody else has an agenda. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they're after. You don't know what they're going to do next. and you had different plans for the day, for the week, for the month, as did your team. And all of a sudden, all of that's changing very quickly. And I mention this for important reasons. The emotions that we feel during an incident, they will impact our ability to respond. And you need to have good plans and processes, which I will share a couple slides in here. But this is why, right? Without a plan, I feel out of control, I shoot from the hip, and that just can make things worse. Things are gonna move fast, right? Again, I don't know what's happening, and while I'm trying to figure out what's happening, the bad guy is doing something. If I start to take actions, the bad guys might see that, and now they react to what I'm doing, and they know at some point they're gonna be detected. So a lot of times they've got a plan A, B, and C, right? They're quietly trying to encrypt your data. But they already had access to your systems before they started doing that. So if you see files getting encrypted and you start to take an action, they might just delete a lot of things, right? They might just wipe your systems because, well, the jig is up and, we're gonna do what we can do with what we've got. Things will happen fast. A lot of people are gonna be trying to take action. If we don't have a good process to say who's in charge and what we're gonna do when these bad things happen, then a lot of people are going to feel that they need to sort it out, right? Which is good that a lot of people want to try to contain this thing and not just sit on the sidelines. But you can imagine how things work if you have, a developer trying to work this thing in one corner and a sysadmin someplace else. And you're the CEO and you're talking to, your finance team, trying to figure out what's happened to them. And you've got an outsourced IT company maybe that supports your servers and they're trying to do stuff. Right? So all these people are scurrying around and, they might not be able to tell the difference between what the bad guy's doing and what people on their own team are doing and undoing each other's steps and just not generally working very well together. So a lot of well-meaning people can collectively make things a lot worse. You're going to get lots of questions, right? So in the midst of this, right, things are out of control, they're changing very rapidly, your team's all running in different directions, and then in the midst of that, you're starting to get questions from the partners that you work with who are maybe seeing systems become unavailable, your customers who can't log into your applications, vendors who maybe are expecting a payment not getting paid. So all this together, it really can pull you in a lot of directions, create a big mess beyond just the technical part of all this. So I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics as well. You may need to interrupt your business to contain these things, right? So when the bad guy's getting right, if we're being ransomed, well, you may want to turn off the internet so that you're no longer encrypting files proactively, or at least you're not leaking data out to the bad guy's servers, knowing that that's going to interrupt things. That's fine. That's an action we often take in incidents, but you want to have a process and a plan for, okay, who decides to cut the cord? You don't want just one guy to go pull the cord. That, again, might make things worse. You might lose your data, right? And we'll talk about, what will probably seem obvious for how we keep from losing data, which is backups. But absolutely, that can be an impact from these things, right? We might need to intentionally shut down our business. We might lose the data that, we value highly if we don't have those good offline backups. You might lose access to the tools you normally use to collaborate. This is one I find people often don't think about. I'll run through tabletop exercises where I'll be talking to the team and they will tell me, all right, so we are pulling the cord, we are not letting the bad guys encrypt any more data. And then the next thing they tell me is that they're hopping on Teams to collaborate and work as an incident team. Say, well, that's very interesting. How are you accessing Teams? What do you mean? Well, you just pulled the cord. Oh, whoops, no, we don't have the internet. So now it becomes, do we have, air cards for people to use or hockey pucks, and or do we send people to Starbucks, or can they even use their laptops? They had another one where they had a endpoint security agent deployed to all their systems, and that gave them the ability to just press a button and cut off the access at a software level for every system in the enterprise. But that application also ran on the security team's PCs. So when they pressed the button to disable everything, they turned off their own access, right? So now they couldn't collaborate at all, and they were all remote. So that made things pretty tough. And so we got talking about creating an exclusion group for them, or having a secondary PC that maybe runs a Linux distribution that they use for incident response. Point is, you need to be thinking ahead of time about how you're going to respond potentially and how your incident team is going to collaborate if you take those response activities. You probably need to have secondary ways of collaborating. It's very easy to spin things up that are cloud-based and things like that, but you don't want to be figuring that out in the middle of an incident. My old company, we had dial-in phone numbers we set up ahead of time, and we published in our incident plan. So if anything happened, we just say, look, we're using dial-in number 1, and we'd all hop on that. Might have to rebuild things, right? If the bad guys go and encrypt our data, encrypt our servers, they all might become unusable. We might need to rebuild these things, and that can actually become more time-consuming than the breach itself. So I'll talk a little bit in the time left about some of the ways we prepare for this bad thing happening. As a Boy Scout growing up, so I like to be prepared a lot. I think it is a really, really good motto for incident activities. You can't be too prepared for these things. I'm going to talk about an incident response plan in the next couple of slides. And that is the thing that I lean on the most and that I build for every environment where I'm the CISO at, so that it's the thing that really captures everything I'm talking about, that you kind of plan ahead of time. I like tabletop exercises to test the plan. We'll talk more about that. Cyber insurance coverage, we should know what that is ahead of time. I'll talk about that because that's something we often are going to exercise in a breach, and a breach assessment to determine if we've already been breached. We'll talk more about that. And finally, what are the key controls that are probably going to help us keep from being breached? So with the incident response plan, the idea is rather than reacting in the moment, the IRP captures our response process ahead of time. It's just what it sounds like, a plan for our incident response. Every incident is different. The steps are generally going to be the same. And I'm going to show you those steps at a high level, and I think the next slide here. You're going to capture contact information and other key information. You need to have a way of knowing when the incident happens, okay, who was all on the team? What are their email addresses? What are their phone numbers? What are their cell numbers? What's maybe a secondary email address? All of the key vendors that you might rely on, right? If you use an outsourced company to handle all your PC administration because they're up on Amazon workspaces in the cloud, well, you better have that company's contact info and know what their response time should be. You have an outsourced, provider for your network, your ERP systems in the cloud somewhere. Who supports that? Do you have their contact info? All those things you really want to capture in this plan. You don't want to be looking for them in the middle of an incident. We need an offline copy of that plan. The reason for that is our systems might be unavailable. If my copy of my response plan is sitting on a file share and the bad guys have encrypted everything on my file share, then I'm going to have a tough time responding. Also, I might not want the bad guys to be able to read my plan. So maybe I don't want any online copies, or if I have them online, they're password protected. Something else to think about. So here I'll cover a little bit of the steps. And again, these are things that I feel happen in every single incident. The ways they happen will vary, but whether it's small or large, you're going to go through these things to some degree. So the first thing is probably obvious. Identification. Somehow I need to learn about the incident. That might be an employee noticing their files become inaccessible. It could be an alert from your MSSP. A point is, somehow the incident team is going to get engaged to investigate. When we engage that team, we need to decide how bad it is, and the severity of an incident can change over time. I might go look into something, and initially it doesn't look like much, and I give it a low severity. But as I continue to look into it a little bit more, I realize, oh no, this is worse than I thought, and it's gone from a low to a high, and that can change the group of people that I engage, because my plan says anything that's over a certain severity, I need to let the CIO know. I need to let the CEO know, whatever it may be. That's typically how we'll do these things. That's why classification matters. On the flip side, if my executives hear rumblings that there's something going on and they haven't been alerted, and they know the plan says anything over a certain severity they get alerted on, they can be less stressed out, and they're not going to go and ask you a million questions and get in your business as you're trying to figure out what we have going on. So this classification, it's not just a trivial thing, which it may seem like. It's a really important tool to manage expectations on all sides so we all know, really whether we should be getting engaged more and who's doing what. Now, more to the actual incident activities. The first thing we're going to do is try to contain. How do we limit the damage? A lot of times I see people, they try to leap right to eradicating, to trying to eliminate anything that's in their environment as quickly as possible. You want to first try to contain the damage before you start trying to wipe things out, because you want to limit it from spreading. You may not know how it's spreading yet, right? So let's take those activities, whether that's pushing the big red button to get your EDR solution to wall off those PCs, or it's pulling the plug on the network. But let's try to do that to eliminate the spread of the damage before we start trying to wipe PCs and remove the ransomware that's on them, maybe. Because if we do it that way, the bad guys might just keep reinfecting, because guess what? They were in our backups, right? If I haven't validated I have good backups, that happens all the time. Bad guys just reinfect you right from the backup that you didn't know was not good. And then we get to eradication. Once I've contained things, once I feel like I've limited the spread of whatever's going on, then I need to find a way to eliminate. In the case of ransomware, if you have ransomware, it got past your endpoint security. So we'll usually look for a different endpoint security tool that we can run. There's a lot of good free ones that you can pull down, and we will find a known infected system offline, run a bunch of tools against it until we know that that system is clean. Once we have validated it's clean, then we develop a process for running that cleaning software on everything that we have. Or we just go straight to our backups. Okay, I have good backups. Now we're going to go through a process of investigating our backups and validating that they have not been touched and infected and ransomed or whatever it may be. And then we start recovery from that instead. And that gets into our recovery phase, right? So eradication, trying to get the nasty stuff out of my environment. Recovery is not just pulling stuff from backup. Recovery is how do I fully get the company back to our original operational state? So I might go through some eradication to get the malware out of my environment, but employees can't they still can't do their jobs fully the way they did before. Recovery means I have all my employees fully back and working like they were before. So that means restoring their files or recreating them. That means returning the internet. If we needed to rebuild systems, we rebuilt things. It's not just PCs, it's not just servers, it's everything. We've got everybody back to a functional state. Remediation, that's our lessons learned. How do we try to improve? How do we try to limit future incidents from happening? I've got on this slide the table of contents from the incident response plan I tend to use. So this gives you an idea. You can see, we're doing things like defining what an information security incident is or is not. That's different for every company. I got that same kind of steps that I mentioned on the last slide. That's in there, and those steps will get fleshed out a little bit differently for every company. But the steps themselves, everybody's going to walk through. We'll have notifications, and I'm going to show you an example of that next. The plan needs maintained. We're going to test it. We're going to update it. We'll talk about testing in a moment here. Then you can see there's these big tables full of contact information. My response team, my extended team, my vendors. I've got a reporting template, right? That template captures all of the information I need to record if I have an incident that mirrors some of these steps that you see above. So it's kind of the basics of what you may want to have. Again, the details get fleshed out differently for everybody. And so here's an example of a notification process. The idea here is kind of like I said earlier, anything a medium or above, we're going to let our entire IRT know something's going on. We're going to call the CIO, and then we're going to figure out what to do. That way, all these like low severity things, we're not nagging people about all the time. This was the process that made sense in one case. I've got some of these that are very complicated. They outline exactly who calls the insurance carrier and when and how that decision is made. This one's fairly straightforward. Incident manager, right? So we have an incident. We need to have a quarterback. Somebody's responsible for really running the incident. I talked earlier about how things can get crazy and everybody's trying to do stuff. Basically, somebody's got to be in charge. And this isn't necessarily based on where people are on the org chart. And you probably want to have a few people that you've designated who can do this role. So if somebody's on vacation, somebody else can take that role. In a smaller incident, the same person may be responding, which I'll explain, to an incident as managing. But in a big incident, you probably want to separate out so somebody is doing the coordination and quarterbacking and other people are doing the investigation, because it's very difficult to kind of face the music with executives, with customers, and coordinate all these activities and be heads down, hands on keyboard, doing the investigating and response activities. Idea with the incident manager, they're pulling together all the internal and external resources, getting input from everybody, right? They don't have to know everything, but they're coordinating. And I said larger incident, you might designate multiple incident responders and separate out the role of kind of coordinating and managing from doing the investigation. Very difficult to really do that investigation while also coordinating, as I said. Tabletop exercise. So these are great. This is how you test and figure out if your plan's good. It's a simulation of an incident. Allows you to really think through nasty scenarios before they happen. Almost always when I do these, and I do these, usually I try to do them every year, sometimes more often with some customers, we always learn something. We always realize something didn't work the way we actually thought it would. Can be very focused on just, your core technical team, can be very broad. I've done these where during the exercise, somebody says, well, here's where I would call, the CEO. Okay, well, let's call the CEO. They've already been given a heads up of what we're doing. Let's actually get their input on the pretend scenario we're going through. You can see from the picture, it's really like it's like a tabletop game. We come in and say, okay, files are being encrypted, now what? And then we all figure out what we would really do. These are hugely important. If you haven't done one of these, I really encourage you to build an incident response plan, go through a tabletop. You'll learn a lot better how to make your plan work. When people write incident plans and leave them sit on the shelf and never go through this exercise, I find that they're not very useful plans. This is a lot of what makes the plan useful. Oh, and I recommend including third parties as well. If you lean on third parties as part of your IT support, include them in your incident response tabletops. Your insurance coverage. So a lot of times I hear, well, if there's a breach, we'll just rely on insurance. I can tell you the insurance carriers are loving that less and less. They're making it a lot harder to get a cyber policy. They're putting a lot of conditions and looking for ways not to pay out because they've spent a lot of money paying ransoms. During an actual incident, I often find the coverage doesn't match the type of loss that people are experiencing. What do I mean by that? So my insurance might cover a first-party loss. So if somebody gets into my network and gets into my systems and steals my data, then my insurance policy will cover identity theft insurance protection for the people who are employees of my company whose data I have. It might cover recovery of my own systems. But you're a startup. Maybe all your stuff's in the cloud. Maybe you do something for your customers in their own cloud tenants. I've got a few customers like that. If that's the case, then your insurance may not cover you if there's a breach scenario that happens in the customer's environment that you happen to manage for them. As an example, it's really important to think through what your loss scenario looks like and make sure your insurance coverage actually matches that, because those conversations don't always happen when the policy is being written, but I can guarantee when you ask the insurance company to pay out, all of a sudden they're going to be a lot more fixated on these details. I would encourage you to look at this at least every year. Breach assessment. There's a saying in security, there's only two types of companies, those who've been hacked and those who don't yet know they've been hacked. The idea with the breach assessment is to try and determine if somebody's been in your network already. Think of it like a proactive forensics engagement. You get the same type of forensics team that comes in, they dig around, they ask for a lot of logs, evidence, and try to see if somebody's already been in your stuff. It's amazing how many times you do that and find, oh no, actually somebody has been in here. They may or may not find something. If it does, and quickly you're going to engage your incident response plan and go through that exercise we talked about. Final thing, what are key controls that are likely to keep these incidents from happening? Multi-factor auth, I talked about that earlier. I can't stress that enough. Endpoint detection and response. So just regular old antivirus is not going to be good enough these days. EDR tools are going to capture a lot more forensic information. You have a lot more capability to contain infections on an endpoint, not just try to prevent it from being infected. Offline backups. It's great if you've got backups. If your backups are all in the cloud, the bad guys are going to get into your system. They're going to wait for you to log into your backup system, and they're going to encrypt or delete your backups. This happens over and over. If you do not have an offline backup of some sort, could be a USB drive, could be an old school tape backup system. If you don't have this, then you are really rolling the dice when it comes to these kind of incidents. Employee training is important to educate people so that bad things don't happen. It's a response plan we talked about. All of these things are things that you are going to be asked in questionnaires from your cyber insurance carrier when they go to write you policy. That is why I've highlighted them. I guarantee you're going to be asked these things, and they may not write you coverage if you don't have them, which should be a strong sign. If they don't want to take the chance that they're going to have to pay out, then why don't you have these things? So to sum it up, because I see we're just about at time, what to do when we've been breached. First of all, do not panic. Stay cool, calm, and collected. Get your incident response plan off the shelf, activate it, follow it, and that will help to make sure things go smoothly. Engage the internal SMEs and external vendors as needed, using the contact info you've documented in that plan. Contain the damage where you can, get the bad guys out, recover from your known good, hopefully offline backups, and hopefully everything goes smoothly. So with that, Tara, I don't know if we have any questions in the chat here.
Not have any. We do not have any questions. If anybody has any and you want to write them in quickly, we could get to them. I know we're at time. Does anyone have a specific question they'd like to ask? Okay. Well, thank you, Chris, for a very formative. I feel like there's a lot of action things I got out of that. So I think there was a lot of things for people to take away.
Fantastic. That's good to hear, and I'm very passionate about this. I'm glad everybody made the time today. If you have more questions about incident response and breach stuff, don't be shy about reaching out to us. Try to cram a lot in a half-hour time period to make good use of your time. We have a lot more to say about this stuff, so always happy to hop on the phone and talk one-on-one if you've got specific questions about your environment, about things that we've seen maybe going through these things. So thanks again for your time, and hopefully see you next time.